The dark side of women Socrates tried to reveal. Part 1. The illusion that blinds men. What if I told you that most men today aren't falling in love with women? They're falling in love with ideas, fantasies, illusions dressed in perfume and smiles. They don't want a real woman. They want a cure for their loneliness. They want a goddess to worship, a home to come back to, a mirror that reflects their worth. And they call that love. Socrates saw this over 2,000 years ago. And he didn't laugh at it. He studied it. He studied why men lose themselves. Not in war, but in relationships. Not in chaos, but in comfort. See, Socrates never said women were evil. What he did say, loudly, clearly, and without apology, was that the emotional dynamics between men and women are far more dangerous than most people are willing to admit. Most men think they're being kind, loyal, loving, but what they're really doing is negotiating their freedom. They give up their standards. They silence their truth. They ignore their instincts, all for peace. Peace that never lasts. Society told them, make her happy, and she'll stay. And so they became servants to someone else's mood. But Socrates whispered something else. By all means, marry. If you get a good wife, you'll be happy. If you get a bad one, you'll become a philosopher. Most people chuckle at that line, thinking it's a joke. But it's not. It's a mirror. A mirror that shows you the truth no one wants to say out loud. Sometimes, it is the very difficulty of the relationship that wakes a man up. It's not the harmony that matures him, it's the tension. Not the kisses, but the confusion. Not her sweetness, but her silence, her distance, her emotional coldness. That's what makes a man question. That's what makes him look deeper. And if he doesn't run from it, if he studies it, it just might turn him into something rare. A man who thinks, a man who sees, a man who can no longer be controlled. And that, my friend, that's dangerous. Part 2. The emotional war you were never trained for. Most men are taught to fight the wrong battles. They train their bodies. They sharpen their skills. They chase money, power, attention. But no one teaches them how to hold their ground. When she's silent, when she shifts her tone, when she pulls away emotionally, without a word, that, right there, is where the real war begins. You think you're strong until the warmth disappears. Until she stops laughing at your jokes. Until she replies with one-word answers. Until she says, I'm fine, but the atmosphere screams otherwise. And suddenly, you shrink. You start adjusting. You soften your voice, change your posture, question your own mind, not because she said something, but because her energy changed. That's the battlefield Socrates was pointing at. He saw how some women don't use aggression to control. They use distance, disapproval, a calculated silence that makes men desperate to fix what they don't even understand. They don't raise their voice. They just raise the tension. They let you cook in your own confusion until you serve up your self-respect on a silver platter. Socrates wasn't blaming women for this. He was exposing a truth most men aren't ready to face. That emotional influence is real. It's powerful. And if you don't learn to see through it, you will always dance to a rhythm that isn't yours. You'll apologize for things you didn't do. You'll chase emotions you didn't cause. You'll bend, shrink, and perform, just to bring back her smile. But her smile was never the point. Your reaction was. Because once she knows you'll bend to her mood, she doesn't need to argue. She just needs to shift her vibe. She becomes the emotional climate. And you? You become the weatherman, always trying to predict storms, always hoping for sunshine. And here's the brutal truth. If your peace depends on her mood, you're not in a relationship. You're in a system of control. Socrates saw this not in books, but in life. His own wife, Xanthippe, was infamous for being fiery, unpredictable. People mocked him for staying with her. But he didn't leave. He observed. He turned her emotional volatility into his laboratory. He studied her shifts, her silences, her storms. And through that, he learned how power hides in subtlety. How control doesn't need to yell. It just needs to feel like love. Part 3. When love becomes a mirror for control. Most men don't fall because of hatred. They fall because of affection. Not the violent kind, but the soft, unspoken, carefully timed affection that only appears when they behave. You don't even notice it at first. She touches your arm when you say something she likes. She disappears when you don't. She laughs freely when you follow her lead. She withdraws when you assert your truth. And little by little, she conditions you, like a trainer teaching a dog. Only the treats are smiles, kisses, warmth. The leash is her silence. And the cage? It's your own need to feel loved. That's the part Socrates was trying to show us. Not that women are villains, but that most men have no idea what they're actually responding to. They think they're choosing love, but they're really choosing relief. Relief from emotional tension. Relief from distance. Relief from her disappointment. And the price of that relief? Your sovereignty. Your clarity. Your ability to think straight. Because once she becomes your emotional thermometer, you're no longer a man. You're a servant to weather patterns. Here's the raw truth most won't say. If she controls your peace, she controls your decisions. If she controls your guilt, she controls your identity. And the more you give up to keep her calm, the less of yourself remains. Until one day, you don't even recognize who you are, only who she expects you to be. This is not a partnership. It's a prison with a scented candle. And most men never realize it. Because they don't see control unless it's loud. They don't see abuse unless it bruises. But Socrates did. He saw that emotional power can be more dangerous than physical strength. Because it wears no armor. It asks for no permission. It just drips, slowly. Until the strongest men soften into silence. Not because they're weak, but because they were never trained to see affection as a weapon. So they stay. They smile. They call it love. But deep down, something aches. Something whispers. This doesn't feel like freedom. And that whisper, if you listen, might just save your soul. Part 4. The fantasy that keeps men weak. Most men are not enslaved by women. They're enslaved by the fantasy of women. An image stitched together from childhood stories, romantic films, and desperate hopes. A dream that tells them, if you find the right one, she will complete you. But here's the harsh truth Socrates knew. No one completes you. And if you think someone will, you're already half a man, waiting to be filled. From the moment we're boys, we're told about her, the one, the gentle, understanding, forever loyal woman who will love us endlessly. The woman who sees our soul, makes us whole, never questions, never leaves. But that woman doesn't exist. She never did. She's a myth born of men too afraid to face the full truth of real human connection. That love is messy. That women are not muses, they're human beings. With shadows, needs, moods, and desires just as complex as ours. But when you chase the fantasy, you ignore the shadow. You excuse the disrespect. You rationalize the manipulation. You make silence seem holy. You make emotional withdrawal seem spiritual. You turn her coldness into mystery. Her mood swings into depth. Her absence into independence. Because the fantasy must survive. It must be protected. Because if it breaks, you'll have to face what you've really been doing all along. Worshipping an illusion. And illusions are safe. They don't challenge you. They don't disappoint you until reality does. And when that happens, men don't wake up. They double down. They say, she's just going through something. She didn't mean it. I just need to love her better. But Socrates would have said, no, you need to love yourself more truthfully. Because when you love yourself truthfully, you stop feeding delusions. You see the human behind the fantasy. You see the power plays, the emotional games, without hate, just with clarity. And clarity is a threat to the system, to the fairy tale, to the part of you that still wants to be rescued by love instead of forged by fire. You were not born to be her savior. You were not born to be her reward. You were born to become a man so whole within himself that even if she leaves, you remain, not bitter, not broken, but awake. Part 5. The game behind emotional distance. Emotional distance is not a glitch. It's not random. It's not always about stress, or hormones, or having a bad day. Sometimes, it's a strategy. Socrates saw this long before the term emotional intelligence existed. He observed how power could be exercised, not through commands, but through withdrawal. A woman doesn't need to shout, demand, or confront. She just has to retreat. Quietly, subtly, and let your mind collapse under the weight of confusion. She pulls away, not dramatically, not with an explosion, but with a look, a pause, a lack of warmth. You ask, "Is everything okay?" She says, "I'm fine, but the temperature has dropped." And now, your brain starts working overtime. What did I do wrong? Should I apologize? Maybe I need to try harder. And right there, you've lost. Because she hasn't asked you to do anything. She hasn't accused you of anything. But somehow, you're bending, you're giving, you're performing, all to repair a rupture you didn't even create. And here's the brutal brilliance of emotional distance. It turns you into the guilty party, even when no crime was committed. It places her in the role of quiet victim, and you in the role of the frantic fixer. And let's be clear, this doesn't mean she's evil. It doesn't mean she's consciously manipulating you. Some women don't even realize they're doing it. But it still works. It still controls. And if you don't see it for what it is, you'll call it being sensitive. You'll call it being in tune with her needs. You'll call it being a good man. But Socrates would have called it what it truly is. Emotional slavery, where your peace is no longer yours. Where her silence is your master. Where you stop standing in truth and start dancing for affection. This is the hidden war most men never train for. They can fight competitors in the market. They can fight men in a ring. But they can't hold eye contact with a woman who just turned cold. They crumble, not because they're weak, but because they were never taught. Emotional pressure is real, and the man who doesn't learn to recognize it will live his life reacting instead of leading. Part 6. The peace you try to buy will cost you yourself. Every man wants peace, not the kind you chant in a meditation class. The kind where the woman he loves isn't upset, where the house is calm, where he doesn't have to walk on eggshells. So he pays for that peace, not with money, but with pieces of himself. He stops expressing how he really feels. He censors his truth to avoid an argument. He apologizes first, every time. He softens, shrinks, becomes more agreeable. He convinces himself that peace is worth it. That a small sacrifice here, a little silence there, will create harmony. But it never does. Because once you start negotiating your identity for temporary calm, you teach her something dangerous. That your authenticity is for sale. And once she learns that, she stops respecting the man and starts managing the puppet. Socrates knew this. He saw how some men traded their soul for stability. And he understood that peace bought with self-betrayal isn't peace. It's imprisonment with soft lighting. It feels safe at first. But deep down, a storm brews. Because a man who keeps swallowing his voice eventually forgets what it even sounded like. He loses his edge, his fire, his clarity, and what remains is a ghost. Smiling, helpful, emotionally drained. And when he finally collapses, society blames him for being too weak, too passive, too lost. But no one asks the deeper question. What kind of peace demands your silence? What kind of love punishes you for being whole? What kind of relationship rewards you only when you abandon yourself? That's not love. That's behavioral training. The truth is, you can't have real peace unless it includes your truth. You can't have intimacy if it costs you your dignity. And you can't lead a relationship if your emotions are being held hostage by her reactions. The man who understands this stops buying peace. He builds it, from the inside out. He stops negotiating with moods. He stops trying to fix storms he didn't cause. He stands, calm, clear, anchored, and in that stillness, he becomes the one thing no woman can manipulate. A man who chooses truth over tension. Part 7. Her silence is not empty, it's a message. Silence. Most men fear it more than shouting. Because shouting is clear. It tells you what's wrong. It gives you something to push against. But silence? Silence is a vacuum, a psychological trap, a space where your thoughts spin uncontrollably, where you invent your own guilt just to fill the void. You come home. She says nothing. She avoids eye contact. Her movements are distant. Her tone? Flat. You ask, is something wrong? She shrugs. I'm fine. But everything in the room says otherwise. And now, you're on trial. Not for what you did, but for what you failed to sense. And here's the dark brilliance of that silence. It forces you to start the interrogation. You question yourself. You replay conversations. You try to decode body language like it's a cipher. She doesn't need to accuse you of anything. Because you'll accuse yourself. And once you do, you'll try to earn your innocence. You'll become softer, more attentive, more agreeable, not because it's who you are, but because you're trying to make the silence go away. You're not fixing the relationship. You're buying relief. And that's the message behind the silence. Dance. Dance for her approval. Dance for her affection. Dance until she decides you've performed well enough to receive warmth again. And the tragedy? You'll call this love. You'll say, she just needs time. You'll tell your friends, she's deep. She processes things differently. But Socrates would say, no, you are being emotionally domesticated. Because when silence becomes a tool for control, and not a moment of personal reflection, it's no longer neutral, it's a tactic. And if you don't see it, you will mold yourself around it. But the man who has trained his mind doesn't panic when silence enters the room. He doesn't scramble. He doesn't chase validation. He stays still. He observes. And he waits. Not to punish, but to remain in power. The only kind of power that matters, self-possession. Silence can be a message, but you decide whether it becomes your command. Part 8. Stop worshipping. Start seeing. There comes a point in a man's life when he must stop worshipping and start seeing. Because worship blinds you. It turns you into a dreamer. A man who confuses obedience with love. Silence with depth. Control with care. You don't see her. You see the version of her you need. You ignore the red flags. You turn mood swings into mystique. You call manipulation just the way she is. But that's not seeing. That's sedating yourself with fantasy. Socrates wasn't warning you about women. He was warning you about blindness, about your inability to see the full picture. Because the woman you're in love with, she has light and shadow. And if you only see the light, you'll miss the games, the shifts, the subtle punishments wrapped in affection. You'll think you're failing her. But in reality, you're failing yourself. Because a man who sees clearly doesn't chase peace through her mood. He doesn't negotiate truth for comfort. He doesn't fold every time warmth is withheld. He sees the beauty and the power. He loves, but doesn't submit. He stays present, but doesn't dissolve. And most importantly, he understands. If love requires the death of your voice, then it was never love, it was a transaction. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. It's about loving with open eyes, not desperate illusions. Final chapter. Clarity is the end of control. This is your wake-up call. Not because you're broken, but because no one ever taught you to see. You were trained to be soft, to be agreeable, to earn her love through sacrifice. But what if that very softness became the leash? What if your kindness became the currency of your own containment? Understand this. Women are not the enemy. They are complex, emotional, powerful, but they are still human. And they are not meant to be worshipped. They are meant to be understood. And that understanding starts with you. Not with studying her moods, but studying your own reactions to them. Not with changing to keep her, but changing to remember yourself. You were not made to chase love. You were made to embody truth. So stop running. Stand still. See. Because the moment you stop begging for peace is the moment you start building it. And when you build it from within, no silence can shake you. No distance can dissolve you. No fantasy can enslave you. You become dangerous, not to women, but to illusions. And that's when your real life begins. If something inside you stirred during this message, if you've ever felt that quiet ache, that sense that you've been giving too much of yourself just to keep love alive, then don't just scroll past. Like this video, comment, even a word, and subscribe if you're done being led by confusion and ready to lead your own mind. Because in the next chapter, we're going deeper into the hidden mechanics of power, the truth behind emotional dominance, and the mindset that separates men who react from men who rule from within. Welcome to clarity. Welcome to the end of emotional slavery. Welcome to Soul of Life.